Well, let's go ahead and go. No point, no reason not to start early. Yeah. If Mr. Johnson could join the dais.
I was thinking the same way.
Good morning, and welcome to the April 25th meeting of the Savannah Chatham County Public School System Audit Committee. I'll call the meeting to order. We have quorum, and I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the agenda for the April 25th, 2024 meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. We'll let Mario sit down and
He's locked out. Just hop it.
That's okay. Well, good morning, everybody.
There we go, Mario.
Sorry about that.
It's all good.
please note that Mario's not late. We started a minute early. He's just on time. The floor is yours.
All right, so the first section of the informational matter section is the internal audit status report. At this point, we're presenting the audit of graduation rate today. So we've added that to our complete list. Currently, right now, we're in the process of the purchasing processes audit, the concession of school store processes audit, as well as the district-wide audit of the speech language pathologist. Under the summary reports, like we had mentioned in the previous one, beginning in April, we will start reflecting changes within the summary of audits report that we have. That's that massive audit that we brought to you back in April. We are shifting that report so it falls within the fiscal cycle of the school district. So we will present it again come July so it can go to the board in August of 2024. But we are giving you an update monthly of the changes of that report so y'all are in tune with that information. So, as I had mentioned before, the percentage of completed recommendations reflects what has been recommendations that have been conducted, that we had provided, management provided actions, and they have completed those actions of which they stated. From the March report to now the April report, you see it has been increased by about 20%, and that will also be reflected in the management action report that we review with you today. Concerning percentage of management actions still opened, this means the due date has not occurred yet. You will see increases when there's a new report added, of which there was because there was a report from last month, so you saw an increase just by 2%. Percentage of management actions still outstanding, that means whenever you see the word in progress. Again, as they have completed the recommendations, as the first section, you will see that this area should also decrease, which you have seen here. So in March, it was 34%. In April, it is 14%. And then the percent of management's request for a complete date change. What this is in reference to is if management had provided us a date of which they did not meet their completion date. We also want to highlight if they had to change that date. So there was some changes here, and you'll see that when we review the management action report a little bit later. This is in reference to some new employees and new positions. So they're having to review the audit reports because they were not part of that audit report at that time, looking at the recommendations that the previous management had provided, and will be adjusting appropriately as they work through those. Do we have any questions concerning this new information that we present?
I'd just like to compliment the staff on making this report happen and seeing a 20% reduction in the outstanding amount of management action items with the introduction of the report. So thank you.
All right, so on page 3, what we've highlighted here, because we're at the tail end of our fiscal year, most of these at this point are going to be a possible carryover into the next audit plan. These are in consideration to actually be audits or be part of other audits that we may bring forth. All of you all should have received an email from me concerning a perceived risk survey when it comes to a list of potential audits we may be conducting for Audit Plan 25. We would appreciate if you could complete that, because that is part of our risk assessment process, of which we complete to determine what we audit for the next year. So last month, we didn't do much professional learning training, but we just wanted to highlight here, of that training that we conducted. And that completes the status report. Any questions of the report as a whole?
Any questions?
Okay. So the next section is the Island High School report. I am going to just ask for you all to let me know how you would like for me to review this report. It was requested of us to bring this report back to you so we could discuss it.
I think the best way, just present the additional findings you found. If there's anything you need to highlight, I think Josh noted that some of the numbers appeared to get a little worse. So just kind of, can you start with that, with the delta that you identified?
Okay, so when we brought the summary of the whole summary audit reports of nurses, that's what really highlighted everybody to question, what was going on here. But when they looked at the whole report with the other business process reviews, they noticed there was multiple areas, such as when you go to page 2, you'll see 39% in purchase cards, 26 in student data, and 31 in nurses. So if you want me to go through the report, I can. It will also give me an opportunity to explain to you a little bit more, because I did take away, and I explained this to Bernadette and to Bernadette Ball Oliver, as well as Dr. Watts, that it was very clear to me. I'm used to always dealing with an audit committee, but I forget many of you are new, so this business process review doesn't necessarily function like an audit. It has a different kind of snapshot that we conduct, but it's a service, a continuing monitoring service that we provide to the school sites as a snapshot in time. So it gives me an opportunity, if I can, if you allow me to kind of go over kind of the questions we look at in each area, so you all can get some more information of this process. Would you like to hear those?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when it comes to purchasing and accounts payable, we look at what we call special check requests, and we look at purchase orders. Special check request is another word for when we seek reimbursement. In other words, the employee's already paid for it, and we're seeking funds from the district to get reimbursed for what we spent. And so it's called a special check request. And so we review those. And what we review for those in that particular order is to look to see if the invoice or receipt of the dollar amount requested matches the check amount, right? That should be exact amounts. We look to see if the invoice and receipt amount was requested. In other words, was it uploaded into Munis? Because that is another process that has to occur. Munis is our financial system. There's a closeout procedure within Munis once that invoice and the receiver and all that information is uploaded for accounts payable to conduct their side of the process. And did the product service adhere to the district guidelines? So we look to see what was purchased, and if it was used by grant funds, we looked at the grant to see if it complied with the grant, excuse me, if it complied with the grant requirements, or we look at the account code based on whether it was a supply or whether it was, some type of other asset to some sort. Did they code it correctly? So we look at those things. And so for islands, all of them, 15, we looked at, actually there was only 14. We usually, our goal is to look at 15, but there was only 14 for that particular year. And so I want to highlight here too, so when you see the percentages, like really that's 29, right? So if you look at a total of 29 for purchasing and accounts payable, but yet we found 4 purchase orders who didn't have a receiver document, 4 purchase orders who didn't have a packing slip uploaded to Munis, and then 1 more. So that's, 9 out of 29. When you look at the percentage, you're like, that doesn't match up. So what I want to get everybody to understand, the only time we have one control question, then it will match, 5 out of 30 is 6%, right? So that would end up that way. But when you have 3 questions, 3 times whatever the number, then your universe gets a little bigger. So don't ever compare it one for one, like if there's 9 here, 9 findings and 29 of areas that we review. There's multiple questions sometimes that we ask in these areas. So it doesn't make it a direct percentage in the sense of there was 9 errors. Right, there's more than sometimes 9 errors. It's 9 out of a total of, in this case, 9 out of 87. Now, in the purchasing, say for instance, there is a incomplete, like for instance, there's no form, then we can't answer the other questions. So that actually lowers the universe of the potential part of that equation. So in this case, with purchasing and accounts payable, when we were looking at the purchase orders, because there were some that had missing signatures and date on the receiver, then we couldn't identify if it was received within 72 hours. So we don't mark that as a no, we just mark it as an NA because we lower the amount of which their percentage could be an error rate come from. So the other question that we ask under purchasing and accounts payable was the purchase order created prior to the receipt of goods? The goal is you do not order the stuff before you seek approval from the finance department. So we always make sure that that question is also asked. So any questions concerning the purchasing and accounts payable process?
Are there any questions? I think, Leah, with that detail, it's very informative. We might just want to, can we just address the purchase cards, student data, and nurses?
We can, okay.
Those seem to be the higher
And
error
then
rates.
next time when I do the bigger report, I will reiterate this, once everybody is also here as well. Okay, so let me jump to, you said, the purchase cards
Purchase cards
next.
just
Yep.
seems to be really high.
All right, like I had mentioned to you before, I think a lot of the purchase card piece is still a cultural shift for some people in the way they pay, not upload the process, because the 3 questions we ask are, did the transaction follow district purchase card guidelines? In other words, was the information uploaded in Munis, those kind of things. So was that piece done? All but 2 of those of the 15 were correct. Are the purchases made in accordance with board policies? This is one of the big areas for them. We had over 5 or 6 no's in this area. And this is where we're seeing the common problem across the district, is that people are going and buying everything on the one card, but the secretary's not breaking it out of the items that are purchased that meets the account code. In other words, you have supplies. Supplies are anything that is consumable within a year and is less than 1,000, right? So we try to make sure that any of that stuff is so that needs to be account coded a certain way. And then you also have, say for instance, they got a stapler. You think that's term supplies, but in our accounting world, it's actually it's a different account code. So it's those kind of things that they're not breaking out when they're entering the information into our financial system. So that is a culture shift, because in the past, purchase cards, there was one purchase card and it was connected to an account line. So they really didn't have to focus on breaking out the individual account lines. So this is really still a cultural change. I'm hoping we'll see it. I know the finance team has worked in having these conversations in their finance meetings with their secretaries to continue to address this issue. The next area was the reconciliation completed within 30 days of the memo billing, and this is where basic 12 areas where they did not do it. So sometimes they're a month behind, sometimes it's 15 days, sometimes I've seen it as far as 3 months out. There is no stopgap, and I don't know, Rosalind, if you can speak further on this, if y'all are interested in that process. But I do, from what I've received lately, is that if it goes beyond a certain time, they are stopping the use of the purchase card, correct? Okay. So they have put a new control in place that if you haven't reconciled in a timely fashion, they will put a hold on the purchase card to address. So I'm hoping next round that we do these, which will be next year come October, we should bring this report, a new report to you, that as a whole, purchasing cards will look better, because this issue with the 30-day memo billing is a district-wide issue and not just specifically to Evans.
Leah, what was the total value of the 16 transactions? I mean, is this a $10,000 problem? Is it a $20,000 problem?
Let me eyeball it real quick. Of the sample that we pulled, we're probably looking less than 3,000 that we pulled in our sample.
That's good news.
All right, with student data, there was a shift in how we looked at this, and we promoted this in the beginning of the year to our principals in relation to how we were looking at the student discipline referral form. For many years, we were only looking at the relationship between the coding of, did the incident code match the form? That should be pretty clear. What you put in the system should match the form. Did the attendance in Power School agree with the discipline referral form? That's very important, that we make sure that they upload it. If it's OSS, they marked it as OSS. If it's ISS, they marked it as ISS. Did the incident type support the description within the report? Pardon me. Sorry. Did the incident support the decision? We want to make sure that the description that was stated matches what the code was. Okay, you don't want those two to be disconnected. Did the consequence level support the information in the code of conduct? That's the consequent code supports the level of discipline that they receive. In other words, was it just an intervention or was it an OSS? That is very important. So we got to make sure that is all complete. And then was the information put into the system within 48 hours. Okay, so the biggest shift that we saw across the district was the incident type to what the code was. Because the process could be the teacher can write up the description, but then the administrator comes back and they do an investigation of what happened. It could be that the description that was written isn't really exact to the events that happened, so the administration can come back and say, this code actually needs to be student incivility and not fighting, okay? Well, if that's the case, we need to see other information to support that, whether it's just a note that the administrator, attaches to the form, because if any of this gets pulled in a legal, in a legal need for whatever, or in further cases, if it gets that this student eventually gets to the hearing office, the people that are involved in looking at this student's discipline packet needs to know the whole story and needs to know that potentially in these incidents, what was written by the teacher may not have been what actually happened. And that's very important for these people to know when they're making the decision on the student's life. So that's why we decided to add that. And that's a component that the data accountability in their edit checks don't necessarily look for, because it's strictly at the form and at the school site. They are relying on the school site to make sure that the information entered into the system of which they do their edit checks and monitor that is correct from that level. So we're looking at it a little bit further than just the data, accountability in the sense of the information reported. So that was a key change.
Are there any questions, comments?
I have one question. When we look at these double-digit percentages, whether it be Islands or any other school, is it mostly because of, I heard, process change, or is it because of the length of time the individual was in that position? Would that have something to do with it?
I have not seen the length of time issue as much as it is the process change, especially when it comes to the student data piece. The purchase card piece side is, I can see that more in the longevity because they're so used to that old process. Shifting it into the new one is slow movement, because the schools with the newer and ones that had not been so set in the ways of doing a certain process had less percentage. We did notice that, yes. I appreciate that question.
Johnson.
I know this is maybe a little anecdotal, but are these issues due to us as a board increasing the amount of workload on the administrative staff, like having them do a little bit more with everything else that we're asking them to do?
No, I don't think so. This is just a continuation of another employee as part of this process, because really the process of the code to the attendance, making sure the consequence is done in the 48 hours, that's been in place for a long time, and that's the IS. The piece about the incident matching the description, that is the role of the administrator, making sure that the information is presented correctly.
Okay, so I'm looking at it with this, with the student data stuff, and then also with the purchasing card stuff, with that being a system, more of a change within the system. And with everything, I'm just trying to see if there's something that we can do at maybe a policy level and working with the superintendent and cabinet to try to make it so that way it's easier for administrative staff. And then I know when we get to the nurses, to do what we can to give them the resources to make it easier for them so things aren't getting missed.
I think Bernadette can answer this one.
So I will speak to the 48 hours in terms of entry with the discipline. And sometimes, especially when you're in a large, comprehensive high school, that can be a challenge to get that done in that 48 hours, depending on what is going on, especially for the IS if they're in the middle of FTE and some other things. So that can have an impact on that 48-hour entry time just by virtue of all of the things that may rise to a different level and need to be handled prior to that. So that can present somewhat of a challenge. And I do think, to Leah's point, the processes as it relates to the others and getting used to new processes, that's where the shift is. And I can easily see how newer employees were able to come in because they didn't have those preconceived notions about how it should operate, and they were able to have fewer errors. But I will speak to the discipline form in terms of the entry, and knowing that that 48 hours can sometimes present a challenge.
Are there any other comments? I would just add that in the same way that when we find out that we have an error rate that associates with $3,000, you know, that is not as concerning as a taxpayer, but I think it was Dr. Hoskins Brown who said a couple meetings ago that the student data is the biography of that child. And to your point, when it gets to your level, that data has to be perfect. I mean, that's really a no-fail data environment because that child is going to stay or go based on the date paper in there. So I just ask that we take that one. And again, if we look at it from a risk standpoint, 48 hours, 72 hours, but the accuracy, I think, is what we'd really like to. I think that's where the high risk is. I think that maybe that's what the audit department's trying to help with, is say, hey, this accuracy of the student data is what's really concerning.
Yeah.
And I do think that's something we need to revisit, because in the throes of that, sometimes, as a principal myself, I have forgotten that the investigation revealed this and didn't put the note on the discipline form, but made sure that the consequence was appropriate for the actual incident,
Right.
but may not have gone back and changed the teacher's incident or put a note on there to indicate the investigation revealed something different. So definitely.
Very important, and this is one of the things that came to us as the concern, which made us started looking at it this way, is, when those packets do fall through the line, and it may be years, 5, sometimes 10 years later, and they're looking at the whole child as to what the district put intervention-wise for the student from day one of his or her discipline issues. You want that accuracy. You want that accuracy in there. So the next section is the nurses section. So for this one, we looked at 7. We only had 7 students. Again, our goal is 15, but if there's not that many students that have medications, then we're limited. So we had 7, and of the 7, 5 of them didn't have a medical administration form that was completed daily. Just so I can reiterate, the authorized medication form is the one that comes from the parent saying, here's the medication, this is the reason why, this is how it needs to be taken, the doctor's name, and everybody needs to sign on it. The medication administration form, that's the one that notates the daily intake of the medication. So there's coding in that if they were absent, it should be should be A. What are the other options that they have, Lisa?
N for no-show.
Go ahead.
There may be an N for no-show.
Ma'am, could you just introduce yourself?
I'm sorry. My name is Lisa Wilson. I'm the District Nursing Administrator for Savannah Chatham County Public Schools. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you for coming.
Sure. The codes that are reflected on the sheet indicate if a student was a no-show, which we have a lot of in high school. Particularly, we also have absent or no meds on file. It is our hope that this form is completed at the end of every medication time. However, as noted by Ms. Ball Oliver, sometimes the amount of students that are coming in the clinic may prevent a nurse from stopping and looking at a record and saying, Michael Johnson didn't come in today at 11, so I'm going to note this right now. And so that was in that case an oversight. May I expand? So when we, first of all, I would like to say that the district nurses completely endorse and excitedly endorse the opportunity to have the internal audit process in our schools. We actually approached internal audit several years ago and asked for this to happen so that we could work toward compliance within our clinics, noting that we had a large number of clinics and we had a wide array of nurses ranging from LPNs to RNs to doctorate level nurses within our clinics. So our goal is that our nurses practice at their highest level of expertise at all times. When we received this report, we immediately conducted a performance, process, and personnel review. All nurses received a reminder notification that they were to complete the forms in full, regardless of whether the student was a no-show or there were no meds in the clinic or the student came. We also had our nurses review the medication administration process and documentation process with the unlicensed assisted personnel that are on site, and our substitute companies were also notified of their need to encourage nurses to remain cognizant of their responsibility in this process. We are very fortunate in this district to have a nurse in every school. We are also very fortunate to have a district leadership team that is able to move in and out of clinics throughout the daily course of the year or the days of the year and conduct spot and random checks so that we ensure ongoing compliance. Additionally, our nurses complete with their site administrator a monthly medication audit every month. That audit is submitted to our team. It is reviewed, and any tracks, trends, or concerns are identified and addressed at that time. And finally, we conduct a self-audit using a very similar tool to what is used by internal audit. The district cluster nurses go into every single site, not just a select number of sites. We conduct a review. We give the information to the nurses. We review it individually with each nurse, and every nurse is required to sign an attestation form, noting the concerns, if any, that were identified, noting their needs for support or professional learning, and also addressing and committing to their level of excellence for the days ahead.
Thank you very much. And again, shameless plug for Nurse Black at Garrison, who takes care of my daughter. So,
Absolutely, and congratulations to Nurse Dolores Borden, who was named the Instructional District Support Person of the Year last night. Thank you.
congratulations. Ma'am, there might have been a question for you. Were there any questions for her?
Yeah, so, all right, I guess, I mean, listen, this is very concerning to me, right? This is one of those aspects where it says 5 of the 7 forms were not documented to identify the medication was administered as required, right? So you indicated that throughout for lack of better terminology, throughout your program, you have internal audits. Did the previous internal audits come up with 5 out of 7 of forms not being administered? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what's the problem that we can take to the school board that needs to be addressed so every child that's due to be administered medication, the nurses are properly documenting their forms. Because as you know, right, if it's not properly documented, it didn't happen. And if we don't know
Absolutely.
what happened, it could lead to major issues down the road. So what, I mean, and you tell me, what can be done to I don't know, to assure, like Mr. Johnson was mentioning earlier, is it just a workload type thing? Is it some internal process? What is it?
So while I cannot expand on the personnel portion of the investigation, I can say to you that as far as the clinic itself, we did look at those 7 cases. One of those students was hospital homebound and not at school. One of those students did not have medication in the clinic, and one of those students had been a continual no-show throughout the time that the medication had been brought in,
Okay.
which was a few number of days before the audit occurred. Prior to the internal audit process being conducted by our internal audit department, we had not begun our day-to-day internal audits. We were just in the beginning of the school. This was done September 26th, but since that time, we have had no further problems in that clinic or other clinics, as we have been conscientious of our need to ensure this was documented. And you are correct, documentation is extremely important. I would like to note that we do have unlicensed assistive personnel that assist the nurses in the event the nurse is called to an emergency or is not in her clinic at that time. And we have found that in some cases, our UAPs are not as attentive to that need to document, and so we are working in that manner as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Mr. Johnson?
Are we still just using paper and pen, paper and pencil? Or are we using technology to be able to document some of this stuff?
To document medication administration, we do paper and pen.
Okay. Would it help by using more technology, or would they just have to click a screen to be able to, for efficiency purposes and everything?
We are actually looking at a SNAP program right now, a software program that may allow us to move forward in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
One thing the nurses also are required to do is document every single visit. So when your daughter comes to the nurse, at
Often.
some point, that information has to be entered into PowerSchool. And we are trying to determine a process so that when a student comes in, rather than a nurse having to stop, document, send a copy home, and then put this in PowerSchool, we have a more efficient way to do that. We're hopeful that will come in the future.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Can I add something? Ramon Ray, Human Resources. Just wanted to add on to what Nurse Wilson said. She said a UAP, and I want to make sure you understand what that is. In a school, you have the school nurse, but when the school nurse is not there for whatever reason, there's these other 2 that are assigned to help. Well, they don't have a medical background. And so when she was referring to UAP, it's the unlicensed clinical assistant, unlicensed personal
Unlicensed
assistant.
assistive personnel.
This personnel. So there's one of those in every, actually there's 2 in every school. So there's a situation where the nurse can't be there, the nurse is sick, nurse is out, and that's when you have those situations when we have this other person that's not, that we expect to do it, and they do a great job, but the reality is they're not a medical person that is assigned at that particular time that these situations may happen.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. And I might add also that our UAPs undergo extensive training. We have a significant process for them to undergo for the education. We have a checklist for them, and they are required to view the same videos that are by law required for our nurses to view to serve both our diabetic and our seizure diagnosed students.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your support of school nurses.
If are there any other questions about the islands audit, we will move on to the graduation report.
So let me kind of, all right. So, because initially when I looked at this, I missed the September 26th date, and I thought this had just been a follow-up from a new one, and that's why I was looking at all the error rates, and I was like, oh, these numbers look higher than I remember. So from a audit committee standpoint, right? So you went over this when this was completed originally, right? You brought it to the audit committee. We went over the report.
We did it in February because we had to get the there were some schools we hadn't gotten to yet, so we had to still go in November, December, and so the timing of issuing the report did come out in February, but also we were short-staffed.
Okay.
But moving forward, we're going to have a new person in place that is going to be designated to do this, and so they should come back into sequence like they had previous to you being in a seat of the audit committee. As an audit committee member is going to be in October. It's usually in October or November when they come to you. So you'll see when we go into schools in August, September, or early October, maybe. But we do allow principals to choose the date. We don't tell them when we're going to show up out of respect of the start of the new school year and to that extent. Plus, we can't go in with nurses and the school nutrition inventory piece because that has to be current year stuff, whereas the accounts payable student data, that's the year before. So that is the difference between the two.
So I guess my question becomes, right, I guess we had this discussion last time with some of the concerning factors, we'll call it the teeth of the audit committee, right?
Right.
Like the actual goal of the audit committee is to review your reports, point out some concerns from concerned citizens, and then just voice the concerns to the board members and the superintendent that's here. I mean, in other words, what I'm trying to get at is I love the nurse's recommendation or explanation of some of the things, right? But I still feel like I want to see more follow-up being done to know that this explanation is actually taking hold and doing something instead of waiting a whole other year until a whole nother report comes in, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes. So one of the things that happens when the audit is completed, you'll see here, you see the recommendations, but management also has to do an action plan. And so there have to be actual steps to address the findings of the audit that were shared with you. And at that time, typically, the recommendations are taken, and then sometimes schools can do more, or they can talk with the audit committee, because I myself have been able to do that and say, well, can we go back and look at this and have clarity and understanding, because maybe this is the action that we need to take, and then follow up as it relates to that. And one thing I do know that Ms. Underwood and her team will do, at least from an academic standpoint, is we'll get updates on, okay, here's where we are with this particular management action plan. We've done a spot check, or we've checked in. They haven't done this piece yet. They haven't done this piece, or they've completed these pieces. So there does have to be a plan in order to address any of the areas of need that were found in the audit.
And one of the takeaways that I've got from our recent conversations is that in the past, we had removed management's response from the report. We're putting that in next year for you all. But these are very time-consuming. Very, very time-consuming. And they're not true audits in the sense of government standards requirements. They're continuous monitoring activities. So we'd prefer to do more audits than these. But we do know the value of these to our principals, as well as looking from, it's like a snapshot where we can look at the controls in these areas as a whole and not necessarily just the school. So it serves a purpose there. You know, obviously we've been able to provide feedback to finance concerning the issues with the purchase card issue. They had seen it, but we were able to give them numbers to show. So there is a follow-up that occurs in the fall. Again, when we go back in the late summer, fall, that follow-up will occur. So next year, you will see the Islands report. You'll see the results that you have here, and then you will see what we found this second round. So we used to do follow-ups in the February, March time to address what you're asking, but it just took too much time away from staff to do that because of the level of follow-ups that are needed. And with the change that was at the recommendation of the last audit committee, in that it's no longer 20%, it's now the average of everything, that might actually increase our follow-ups, which will take us even longer. So we would like to support you in that, but my request is from a director standpoint to you is that we would really focus on wanting to do more district-wide audits, and these are more snapshots in the sense of showing principals, these are some concerns within your school. We've got that management action plan, and then we'll do a follow-up for them. It's just not as a full year.
No, I think I understand. Does
Okay.
the new staff on the audit committee, the incoming, does that allow, like, frankly, from my standpoint on the audit committee, these snapshots are the ones that I'm like, okay, well, let's, like the nurse medication, right? That's a big one right there, like Chairman Woods said, right? 3,000, I get, right? That's a concern as a taxpayer, but medication for a student is very concerning to me. I like seeing the snapshots. If the audit committee were fully, I don't know, fully employed, right? If you had every seat filled, would you have enough to do more spot checks?
I've got to assess their skill set at that point, but then probably, yes, we can, I can look at that again. And the only thing that happens is when we do it that way, especially with nurses and with school nutrition staff, if we come back in, because I do not like to go into schools in March and April, because that's testing time, and we don't want to, interrupt their time. So it's usually January or February. Well, when we're done in these in October, there's not enough time for them to do potential training to the staff and enough time for them to learn and implement a new pattern of behavior in that training to make an adjustment by the time we come out. That was one of the things we also discovered by going in February and March. But we can do that if you would like us to do that.
I think we continue that conversation. We can look at some solutions. I think one thing that does help to the teeth question is that's why we've added the management action report
Correct.
to the agenda, so that every month we see how we're doing on the execution of our plans.
Right. And what, in the past, we hadn't brought the business process reviews because we kind of separated them out. But moving forward next year, we will include all that into this as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
No, I think we're
All right.
All right, the next item is the management action plan, and I will try to briefly go through this as quickly as I can so we can get to the graduation rate audit. There, as you saw in the initial summary of audit reports update, there was a lot of completed ones, and you will see this in reflection here. Many of you also have a paper from Mr. Dave Feliciano doing an update on one of his management action plans. I will get to that in a second. So I don't know how you want to go through this, George. Please guide me on what you think is best on how to approach this, since this is our second meeting
Yeah, I
with
will
this report.
open it up for any comments from the committee first, and then I'll just save my comments till the end.
All right, with that being said, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and update Dave Feliciano's area, and let me find. All right, so that is the contract audit of the Chrome device hardware and software. We had already marked it completed. There was a remark from the director level at that point who provided this information, but Dave wanted to clarify even further. So for this audit, the response is that we had determined if our recommendation was determine if the family protection plan meets the financial needs of the district to recoup cost incurred by the district and adjust the plan fee based on this analysis, or determine if the financial cost should be absorbed by the district as a loss and a cost benefit to the public. The action by management was that they would conduct an analysis in a year of the FPP and yearly expenses on maintaining those devices. And based on those results, a determination would be made. So the response is the department met internally to review the revenues generated by the FPP and the expenses on the break fix repairs. The FPP current fees do not recoup the cost of maintaining student devices throughout the district. Furthermore, FPP is not mandated, is optional to families. The funds generated by FPP are used to offset the district's yearly break fix expense. Based on this information, the department will continue to provide the optional FPP for $25 per device to offset the accidental damage to student devices. The intent of FPP is to provide students with an option to purchase protection on devices provided to their children. It was never intended to cover the 100% of the district's break fix device expense. The department will continue to promote the FPP as an option for families and use the generated funds to offset the repairs on student devices.
Are there any questions? This is the insurance for the laptops or Chromebooks that children take home with them.
Yes.
And we're going to continue to offer it. And again, like we talked about it when we did this audit, some of this just gets chalked up to benefit to the taxpayer. I think that's great. Thank you, Mr. Feliciano. If there are no questions about the management action report, my only comment is specifically, the biggest one we identified last time was about the background checks as it related to contracting. And I see here that, I understand that we're going to get that fixed, and it's going to take another 2 months to get that updated.
There is a correction,
Okay.
because we did meet after I had sent this report out to you. We met yesterday, so there is an update to that. So that language is already within contracts. So we're moving forward as though it has been completed and they're addressing the situation, so.
Okay, so that language, district can't, I would refer should or shall, but district shall require, or can require BGC background checks at any given time during performance of period contracts. And that's in all of our current contracts?
Yes.
correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. That's,
And we'll reflect the update next month.
okay. I think that was the only one that jumped out at me, other than the fact that the capital project ones, you mentioned that there's a new person in that position and he's going through everything.
Right, and that's what I had mentioned before, that we need to allow, plus we've given him the audits to review. That way he can understand the context of our recommendations and address it appropriately.
Yeah, I think the only other one, it says completed, but there's, came out of the Jenkins one, the East Bloss, the final review for Jenkins. It says it was discussed at the capital improvement meeting. I just think, again, as we go into this next round of building, change order management and change management is a big part of our fiduciary responsibility. So I just ask that everybody take that very seriously. We don't need to build any more boats named change order. Okay. Are there any other questions about the management action report? Seeing none. Believe it or not, that was all just information, so we still have to approve the minutes from last month. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Also move. All right.
Properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the March 28, 2024 meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved.
And our next, Jack O'Connor is going to present his report on the audit of graduation rate.
Good morning.
Morning.
Glad to be here and discuss our audit of graduation rate. So our overall rating for this audit is satisfactory. Overall, we found the district is in compliance with most of the applicable guidelines and has really effective procedures in place related to graduation rate. A lot of robust programs at the schools for tracking students' progress towards graduation, for identifying students who are at risk for not being on track, and for tracking down students who kind of fall off the radar and no-show or might transfer without notifying the school. We did identify a few areas of improvement needed related to accuracy of withdrawal documentation and variability in assignments and grading practices. Just a little background. So in talking about graduation rate, what we're talking about is cohort groups that enter ninth grade together in a given year and the percentage of those students that graduate within 4 years, with some procedures in place for adding and removing students as students come and go from schools. The district had over 2,300 graduates each of the past few years. Our graduation rate has been relatively consistent pre and post pandemic. So, around 88%, 2019, 2022, and then just over 89% last year. Our objectives for the audit were to review the procedures used within the district for adjusting those cohort groups when students come and go, and determine if they align with state guidelines. Check to see if those procedures are implemented with fidelity across the schools. Determine if criteria established by teachers in the district for assigning student grades align with just state and district guidelines, and see how uniformly those criteria are applied across their students, and then to determine if students within the district who have graduated have consistently met all of the requirements in place established by the state and the district. Fieldwork conducted February through April of this year. We touched each of the 11 high schools in the district. And for the criteria, we used the criteria created by the Department of Education and by the District Board of Education. We reviewed student data for the previous 2 full school years, surveyed and interviewed district staff at the district level and the school level, representatives from the Department of Ed, other districts within the state, and conducted internal control tests for managing cohort groups and awarding high school diplomas. So like I said, we did have 2 observations. The first has to do with accuracy of withdrawal documentation. We did rate this area satisfactory. The district has effective procedures in place for monitoring graduation rate and maintaining cohort groups. So what we did here is we took a sample of students, ended up with 117 students based on our sample methodology. We took the withdrawal documentation the schools had on file and compared it with what Godot had in their system, and found that it matched for 108 of the 117 students, so over 92%. So we had 9 discrepancies. 3 of those would have impacted the student's cohort status. So for 2 of those 3, we actually had documentation on file that would have allowed us to remove them from that cohort, so they wouldn't count against graduation rate, but we didn't do so. And then 1 case where it was the flip side, where we didn't have sufficient documentation on hand to justify removing them from the cohort group. The other 6 discrepancies would not have affected the cohort status. So, for example, we had reported them as transferring to homeschool, but they actually transferred to a private school. So they're able to be removed, but just the documentation didn't match up. Those discrepancies could, depending on how they fall in a given year, could result in inaccurate data being used to calculate graduation rate. The way it happened to fall this year, it actually would have slightly suppressed our graduation rate if this sample, generalized to the whole cohort group. So our recommendation is to develop procedures to ensure the accuracy of withdrawal documentation, and management, agrees with that recommendation. Their plan is to provide reminders through email for principals and teams to review any potential student record changes relating to withdrawal codes over the summer in July and August. That team responsible for that will be personnel from school governance, principals, teachers, counselors, information system team members, who are really the group that's monitoring cohort for the district. And that will be completed over the summer. Our second observation has to do with variability in grading practices. So for this, we looked at district policy IHA, which establishes the district's grading policy for high school students. That is a 60-40 formula, where 60% of a student's grade is assessments and 40% is classwork activities. This criteria is very broad, so it allows teachers a lot of autonomy in grading, which is important, but allows for a lot of flexibility, I guess. So what we did here, we reviewed grades from the 4th quarter for a sample of students, ended up with 330 students across 66 different courses. So we ended up with 6 courses at each of the 11 high schools, did 3 per year, and found that over 94%, so 311 out of those 330 aligned with that 60-40 formula. So we looked at the grades that were entered in Power School, put them in that formula, and matched the result from that to what the student was assigned as a grade for that quarter. Of the discrepancies, 9 of them were off by 1 or 2 points. 4 of them were off by over 15 points. And we found a good deal of variability in the number of assessment or classwork activities that were assigned in given courses. Some variability in the completion rate of those assessments and classwork activities, and variability in the approaches to, how teachers provide opportunities for extra credit, allow for makeup work, and grade recovery. And so this variability, while it's in line with the district policy, could result in credits being awarded to students inconsistently. In similar courses taught by different staff, could have pretty different criteria or opportunities to earn credit. This is a table that's included in the report. I just included it in case anybody had any specific questions about it. But our recommendations here, we had two recommendations. One is to conduct an analysis of the district's grading practices to determine the effects of variability in grading and assess the risks and potential impacts on credits earned towards graduation for students in the district, and then use the results of that analysis to inform any changes to district policies and procedures. And then to create district guidelines that align with Georgia law that govern opportunities for extra credit, late assignments, resubmitting work for an adjusted grade, and grade recovery. And corrective action plan here is management plans to review policy IHA, regulation IHAR, and any other relevant policies and regulations. Review the district's policies and procedures regarding grading or not the district's policies and procedures, review policies and procedures from other districts to garner additional information that may assist in appropriate revisions that are still aligned to Georgia state law regarding grading. And the district will establish guidelines that adhere to state law and will allow for consistency of practice as it relates to extra credit, late assignments, resubmitting work, and grade recovery. That same team from the first recommendation will be involved here, school governance, principals, teachers, counselors, and identified SIS team members. First two steps here, the completion date is November of this year, and then the third step is January of 2025.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
So from the non-educator standpoint of reading this, right? So 94.2% of the grades appear to be calculated using the district's policy of 60/40. Like what's the error rate percentage we're aiming for, right? Some schools got 100. Like, is that when we come back and do this, we're hoping everybody has 100? Is that what we're aiming for? Are we aiming for 96?
Difficult to say. And like I said, in 9 of the grades were off by 1 or 2 points. And without tracking down the teacher of that course and asking thorough questions about each individual student, it could be
Right, so
bonus points for attendance or participation. Or
we're way down the rabbit hole here for the layman. So this percentage is the percentage of classes that had a distribution of 60/40 between assessments, tests, and classwork.
Yeah, so the
So if you were
that
off,
311,
right. So if you were off, if you were at 80%, that might mean that you had 4 out of 5 classes had 55% classwork and 35% or 45% tests, right? That's the.
It's not necessarily that. It's putting the grades that are entered in Power School, and
Right.
each grade is coded as assessment or
Intimately
classwork.
familiar with.
And then, taking, if you have 10 assessments, all right, your average there is 80, and that's 60% of the grade. And then 15 classwork activities and 40%, or whatever the average there is, the other 40%, put those together, say the student comes up with an 84. And then we
Right.
looked at what their quarter grade was, and if they had an 83, that doesn't match.
Right,
It's
okay.
off by a point, but it still doesn't match. Whereas if it's an 84, that's a clean match.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any questions or comments?
I have, this appears to be based strictly on teachers. not on requirement assessment by the state. This has nothing to do with state requirement of testing, rest intercourse testing, or,
No.
okay.
No, so some of the end of course assessments are included in the grade, but that was factored in as part of this. Yes.
And I think you make a good point that when it's a strategy, and I'm not a teacher, but if the mandated test is not a graded event, then that lowers the child's potential.
Right.
I mean, high school kids can be clever, and they, I would never, hey, this matters or it doesn't matter. So that may be affecting some of our outcomes.
Right.
But, any other comments, questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the report. It's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the audit report on the graduation rates. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
The audit report is adopted. And with that, our next meeting is June 27th. We do not meet in May because of graduation. So congratulations to all of those graduates, including one special one, Molly Woods. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.